Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I greatly appreciate you being with us. These podcasts, we hope to explore the issues that touch us and our families in light of the revolution in longevity that is reshaping our Jewish world. And we appreciate your support. You can follow us and listen to previous podcasts by going to our website, jewishsacredaging.com, as well as the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. We are very grateful for your donations, which help us to further our work. And with great honor and pleasure, we welcome to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, Dr. Andrew Rehfeld, the president of my alma mater, the Hebrew Union College - Jewish Institute of Religion. It was always tough to get on the basketball jersey. Dr. Rehfeld, welcome. Welcome to Seekers of Meaning. Thank you very, very much for being with us. How are you feeling?
Thank you for having me, Rabbi Address. I'm feeling relatively good, all things considered. We're at a horrible moment of time in our nation, or at a very difficult, challenging time in the world. And I am experiencing first world problems, but feeling the burden of so much oppression all around me.
Yes, it is a strange and amazing time. There's no question. And for clarification, this is posting in the middle of July. We're recording this about a month prior, in the middle of June. So, Dr. Rehfeld, you've recently come to the college after the death of our colleague, Alav Shalom Aaron Pankin, and I'm interested in journeys, personal journeys and stories. It's always fascinating to me. What brought you to the presidency of the Hebrew Union College? Was there an aha moment? Was there something that said, this is a calling that I need to follow?
Well, there are two answers. The first answer is that I got an email from a search firm asking me to put my hat in the ring. And my immediate response was to say, well, I'm not a rabbi, but I'd be happy to have a conversation about others that I think would be good for the job. It took them about 3 weeks to convince me that the search committee would actually take my candidacy seriously. And once I had a better sense of how they understood their work, and I had already appreciated and knew about HUC and its potential to shape the entirety of North American and really global Jewish life, it was a very easy decision, if they were interested, for me to put forth something of a vision. Very hard to have a vision when you're from the outside, but at least a sense of the potential of this institution to change the Jewish world. In terms of the longer answer, it really goes back to a young adulthood shaped by the Reform movement. I got involved after being a bar mitzvah at Mainline Reform Temple in your home of Philadelphia.
All right.
Max Hudson, Jack Luxembourg, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
I moved, huh?
No, I recall that I used to teach there many years ago. Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead. I moved to Baltimore, where my father lived, and went to Baltimore Hebrew congregation and got involved in the youth group. I spent a summer at Quds Camp, which was a transformative experience for me. I spent a year in Israel back before they were called gap years, but in the gap between my high school and my college time. And I left for college, and after college, with the firm intent of becoming a rabbi. I served for 2 years as the Ph.D. regional advisor, working for Rabbi Danny Freelander in New Jersey. That's when you and I first met a very long time ago. I looked a little bit different than I do now.
Yeah, I had hair.
So I then went off. That's right. I went off to the Joint Distribution Committee to India, where I, along with Rabbi Leon Morris, now Rabbi Leon Morris, we both took our applications for rabbinical school at HUC with us in our back pocket. He filled his out. I did not. And I can talk about why I chose not to, but I came back home and I realized there were 3 things I cared about: learning, teaching, and community and engagement and building, all within a Jewish context. And so I wound up doing my learning and teaching as an academic. I got a Ph.D. in political science from the University of Chicago. And I got a master's in public policy also from Chicago. And I decided to do my community work and my Jewish content work in terms of my service. I served on the board of KAM Isaiah Israel, learning from rabbis Rachel Mikva and Arnold Jacob Wolf. And then I came to St. Louis to be an assistant and then associate professor at Washington University, where I was on faculty for 18 years. And during that time, I was recruited to be more involved in the Jewish community professionally. I stayed very active as a lay leader, and more was drawn in content to Jewish topics and study. I developed a class on Jewish political thought. I developed a separate class on the history of Zionism, history of Israel and Zionism, and was then recruited to be the CEO of the Jewish Federation of St. Louis in 2012. And it was that platform that I think drew the attention of the search firm to
Right.
me as a CEO and an academic, and the rest is the first part of the story.
Well, it's fascinating only because Jewish geography, I mean, mainland reform, I used to teach that as an undergraduate with my friend, one of my closest friends, Larry Simon, of blessed memory.
Wow.
And my dad migrated to Baltimore, and I would commute back and forth from Philadelphia to Baltimore. And he was very active in the Brotherhood at Baltimore Hebrew. So it's
Wow.
amazing. I mean, this is just like a Bashir thing. We just discovered this connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Baltimore was my every other weekend back and forth on from Philly. So you mentioned the power or the possibility of HUC to shape um, the future of the Jewish community. We are in such a moment of transition across the board, institutionally. My old employer, the Union for Reform Judaism, is undergoing massive restructuring and downsizing and challenges. The CCAR also is trying to expand its thing. HUC. I'm interested to pursue that. When you say to shape the future of the Jewish community, how do you see HUC with 4 campuses and all the things that we're involved with predominantly training the next generation of rabbis, cantors, communal service workers, educators? How do you see us doing that, given this tremendous age of transition?
Yeah. So I think a couple things are true. Number one, denominations today are under intense stress. Membership organizations are under intense stress. And the challenges that you see within the movement are a reflection of North American Jewish life. Over the last 30 years, we've seen weakening in terms of the 3 factors that I think are most important: Jewish education, Jewish engagement, and Jewish identity. The knowing, the doing, and the being of Jewish. I think HUC has a different value proposition. Number one, it has to be, it is, and it will remain the seminary of the Reform movement, providing cantors and rabbis to our congregations. And in that respect, we're actually seeing a huge generational transition coming up with the retirements of baby boom rabbis just beginning and just underway. Now, you're right, at the same time that's happening, there's contraction going on. So that will somewhat be offset. But it won't fully offset the need that we have for replacement and for growth, for significant growth for in congregational rabbis. I would say to that end that the numbers of rabbis that used to be produced by HUC, which was at its height 60 or 70 a year, we have been over the last 10 years down to below 30. Right now we're hovering in the mid 20s. I should say we remain the market leader. That is, we produce more rabbis per year than any other institution. And the reason that we remain the market leader, even though our numbers are so down, is that the totality of non-Orthodox seminary of interest in becoming a non-Orthodox rabbi has declined significantly. Over the last 10 years alone, it's declined by about 30%. As all the seminaries combined, we're producing about 100 rabbis, non-Orthodox, and now we're producing about 70. So we remain the market leader, and I believe that the demand will be in the future. So number one, to remain that place. But number two, this is what's really important and what drew me as a non-rabbi to think that I could add some value to the institution. It's the recognition that what HUC is doing and our students are doing is serving the entirety of the Jewish public sphere. the network of institutions that define Jewish community, and that really it's that network that is providing strength and sustenance to our congregations and to the Jewish people in North America. It's your Jewish Federation, it's your Jewish Community Center, it's your Jewish Family and Children's Service, it's your Jewish podcast, and your Jewish newspaper, to the extent you still have a Jewish newspaper or online presence.
Right.
And our rabbis are increasingly going into non-congregational places, and they're pursuing what has a term that's come to be known as the entrepreneurial rabbinate. The rabbinate of new institutions, of new ways of serving old institutions. And I think that's where HUC, with a model that has, we're the oldest institution, seminary institution, is training rabbis, but also Jewish nonprofit managers and Jewish educators and cantors, that in ways that will continue to transform the entirety of the Jewish public sphere.
So on the entrepreneurial rabbinate, because I know it is a growth area for a variety of reasons, many of which you've just alluded to. Are we starting in HUC to incorporate discussions, senior seminars, a class on the economics of the new rabbinate? Not only the basics, like you always used to be a senior seminar and contract negotiating stuff, but really, to those students who are coming through the school who say, I am attracted to an entrepreneurial type of rabbinate. I do want to start something on my own, but I don't know how. So are we incorporating that in the curriculum in any way, shape, or form?
We have incorporated in the sense of the opportunities for our students to get a master's degree in nonprofit management through the Zellico School, for example. And in certain more practical ways, we are beginning a strategic planning process. And Rabbi Address, what you just mentioned, is to me one of the core areas we need to look at. Is our curriculum currently meeting the needs that our rabbis have going out there? The interesting thing that I've come to learn from being here for 15 months, talking to people, reading extensively on rabbinic formation, and also serving in the field and having been exposed as a lay leader on a board, as a congregant to multiple synagogues, as a song leader before that, particularly in the 90s in Chicago, working with many congregations, and then as the Federation CEO, is to recognize that there's not one kind of rabbinate, but there are multiple rabbinates. And I am very interested in asking our rabbinic educators internally at HUC to figure out how can we provide more focused tracks for rabbis that want a managerial focus, that want an entrepreneurial focus, that want a spirituality focus, that want a pastoral focus. Right now we have 5 years of education. We have long recognized, Rabbi Ellenson, who has been a very important advisor to me, David, who helped shape and transform generations of rabbis, and then as chancellor of the institution, he has spoken about our challenge as a Reform seminary, taking students who don't have the background that other rabbinical students might, whether at JTS or certainly the Orthodox seminaries. Our students have tended not to come from day schools, have not come, even if they come through the Jewish camp system, which has been fantastic, they don't have a rich Jewish education. And so our curriculum has been designed, I would say, from a sense of wanting to make sure that they have as much information as possible during these 5 years. I have a slightly different feeling about graduate and professional education, including rabbinical formation. I think it needs to discipline a student in the habits of learning that will help them grow as, in this case, a rabbi, a cantor, a Jewish educator for the rest of their careers. And that means doing a little less when they're in school. Our students are tremendously scheduled from 8 to 4 every day. And I'm concerned that we give them enough time for breathing, for studying, for formation, for spiritual growth, rather than a franticness of, oh my gosh, if we don't add the extra course, they're not going to know this or that. They're not going to know it even if we asked an extra year. So we need to be focusing, and we will be focusing in a way that even adds greater value to an already very strong program.
Yeah, the time, man. I remember when I was taught for. I mean, I still teach in the D-Min program, but when I was teaching in the education and rabbinic programs with Evie Rothstein, so many of the students were so frazzled with time. I mean, they would finish their classwork, have to take the subways to teach at a synagogue somewhere in the greater metropolitan area, then come back either for a night class when they had them or do their homework. I mean, I know it's different in
Yeah.
Cincinnati. It's a different lifestyle. I know it's different in LA. Um, I mean, you're right. The time management for students, and especially those juggling a family, and is increasingly a challenge given everything that's going on and the demands. You factor in student pulpits, or it is a challenge, and the world has changed since many years ago when I went through HUC. It's gotten much more complicated. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say one thing about that. There is a model of um, of of the seminary and of the school as a refuge from the world,
Right.
and I think that's an important model that. With all of the practical things that we require students to do, that we could reclaim a little bit, and it's modeled after Moses' 40 days on Sinai. It's important to understand that the great legislators in history have taken the time at a distance from the people, a distance from the city, a distance from the world, to craft the very things that are most important to shaping the world on the other end. And rather than seeing the 5 years as necessarily one which is grounded in the world, even though that's what rabbis, cantors, Jewish educators are going to be doing, to use it as a refuge, a place of a sanctuary of solitude for reflection. Moses spent 40 days on the mountain. Plato's Republic is importantly created at a distance from the city, very situated in a literary sense away from the city. And you find this throughout literature with the need to separate. And I think that we could take that lesson from our own tradition and apply it a little more to the crafting of roles in cantorial and clay kodesh at the institution.
Do you ever think it's possible that this happened? And I'll just speak very personally. After my third year,
Yeah.
and going right from undergraduate school to HUC, a whole group of us took a year off. Um, about I think about 8 or 10 of us from my original class. Most of them went to Israel to study. I took a congregation in London, which was easily the most transformative year of my life.
Yeah.
But it was out of the system. It was like giving your mind uh, it was a wilderness experience, but in a different way. Do you think that would ever be part of the curriculum and saying, okay, in the middle of the year, we're gonna take a break? I mean, there's economic issues, there's family issues. I know that, but in a theoretical sense, because I think what you're alluding to in this need to recharge one's batteries, even while you're in school, you think that's ever a possibility that could happen formally at HEC?
Well, it's funny you should raise that rabbi address because I had a faculty member send me a proposal to recraft the 4 years of stateside education. That's in addition to the first year in Israel,
Israel, right?
and to do 2.5 years of strictly classroom education, and then do the last year and a half out in the field in full-time practical work. And
Wow,
particularly with distance learning, what it is, you could now do whatever remaining electives there are, zooming in, and
right.
it would craft. I don't know if 2.5 years would be enough, maybe a full 3 years, but do the last year as a residency model, not require active student pulpit work during those initial 3 years. There's a lot of downside to that, just to be clear. Our provost, Rabbi Andrea Weiss, who's just been inspirational and a force behind the work that has been happening in the last 2 years.
Another
She
Philadelphia,
speaks eloquently. Yeah, another Philadelphia.
right?
She speaks eloquently and importantly about the value of learning and doing at the same moment. So you have a Bible class that you go to in the morning, and you have to teach Bible in the afternoon, and you can come back the next class and reflect on how you applied it. That would be lost in what I'm proposing, or what this
Correct.
faculty member had proposed. What's lost now is the ability, as you said, to be fully immersive somewhere else outside, and also to get a kind of sustained practical education that going to a student pulpit, even if it's on a weekly or biweekly basis, you're not getting, because you're not embedding yourself. There's one other piece. As community needs change, and we have congregations that need more full-time student support, we can't get everywhere at once. Even with 3 campuses, there are places that people are spending 6, 7 hours each way just to get to. And a
It's going to get
residency
worse.
model would allow us to serve the union in a much more sustained way.
Are we seeing an increase in second career rabbis, second career
Ah,
students coming back?
great. Thank you for raising this. The other piece that your thought experiment raised about taking a year off is the maturity level. And I think generally having older rabbis, and Clay Kodesh is really important. We are seeing an interest in second career changes, but we currently don't have a platform for a low residency model to train rabbis and cantors. Other institutions are getting into this business. And as part of our strategic planning process, we're going to have to ask the question, can we come up with a low residency model for rabbinic formation and cantorial formation that meets our standards of excellence? And if we can, we need to get into that. And if we can't, that's okay, but we need to be able to refer people to it. I think it's a tremendous opportunity to enrich leadership of the Jewish people by meeting this need. So I'm hoping that our faculty can see a way to designing a program that meets our levels of excellence that we require.
You know, we're in this transition, and so much is changing. And last month, I got a notice from my DMin dean that we're going to, at least in the fall semester, be all electronic, all virtual. So that's going to present, I imagine, to the people who are teaching text classes more challenges than frontal lecture classes or interactive classes. But uh, as this emerges and we move out of the pandemic mode, do you think this is the real future of Jewish education and perhaps seminary education? More and more electronic, virtual will allow people to perhaps, I want to be a rabbi. I can't change. I'm living in the middle of, let's say, Nebraska, and I can do this online. Or is that totally, and I know there are online seminaries, which this is a
Yeah.
whole other
No,
conversation.
yeah, I think it's a future. I don't think it's the future.
A
Number one, I
future.
do think we need to. I need to think we need to figure out how to do it and at a level of excellence so as not to compromise standards. And I would say that there is nothing like the power of being together as part of formation, whether it is as a nonprofit manager or as a rabbi or a cantor, to come together to learn with other people, to have the interaction of people that are going through a process, so long as you're giving them time to actually spend to build sacred communities, and use the time in the classroom and on campus as a laboratory for developing new ways and new approaches. So it is an approach. I think we are now having familiarity. I suspect this coronavirus will be with us at least through the full of calendar 21 before we can really come out of it. So I think that we will have trained a generation of people to be used to learning and interacting on this. And I think it's a great opportunity for HUC to expand its impact into another realm. Even though we don't think that it substitutes for in person, right? Because there's a loss, but we need to mitigate the loss instead of saying we're not going to meet the need.
No, I think potentially it has the potential of expanding HUC's footprint around the world in ways that we could never do it in the person to person way. And certainly
Look
the
at
technology. Go ahead.
Oh, well, just look at what you've been able to do with this podcast and look at other efforts like this. You are reaching and developing Jewish community in a non-conventional way. And
When
if
one,
we're going to say we're not going to be in that business, we're not going to actually get into that, is to take a path. It isn't simply elitism of a certain kind. It is basically saying we're going to get out of the business of thinking that we're here to lead the Jewish community. We're just here for a very sacred few who can afford the time, the money, the resources to relocate, be in community now. Even if that's the best way to do it, we need to be able to express ourselves as an institution for community education wherever people are. and meet the needs of the people where they are.
Look, the screen is the new reality, and all we have to do is take a look at my grandchildren, who they're so totally familiar with it, and for them to learn from it is not unusual. That's part of their ambiance of their way of life. So when these kids come up out of high school and get ready to go into their calling, and many of them will choose Jewish professional life, for them to sit and say, okay, I have 3 classes, 2 of them I'm going to be online. I'm going to go to these 3 lectures that I can. Somebody's speaking in Los Angeles, somebody's speaking in London. I want to hear Jonathan Sachs in London. I'm not going to London. I just plug the mission. I think this is the way of the future, and the both and, as you're talking about, is really obviously congratulations. I think it really can expand the footprint of HEC globally. The alternative seminary growth. How are we? I mean, to put it bluntly, how can we compete? I mean, students come out, younger students, second career students, they spend 4, 5, 6 years perhaps getting their rabbinic education, a rab ed, the educational thing. They're qualified, they've had experience. They go out and they're competing sometimes in congregations with somebody who's gotten the mail order semicha after 2 years or whatever. The world has changed. How is HEC dealing with this? Because this is a new reality.
It is a new reality. We're just beginning to deal with it. The truth is that this is a phenomenon of the last decade that is only now picking up steam. And I think that we have to compete in 2 areas, and both of them can be defined by excellence. Number one, by understanding what differentiates us on the faculty side as an academic, scholarly institution. We were built on the back of a Wissenschaft approach to Jewish life, the study of Judaism and Jewish life from a scientific point of view, a historical point of view that reflects the values of the Enlightenment. With the exception of JTS, there's no other institution in the religiously progressive area that does that with the level of commitment of resources, both in terms of tenure faculty, in terms of scholarship expectation, in terms of the cloud library, in terms of our resources. So number one is to leverage what we have in a more fulsome way to differentiate ourselves as a scholarly institution. And number two, to compete on quality of the program and quality of the students in particular. We continue to recruit really great students, but from the same pipelines that we've been recruiting at for the last 50 years. They're pipelines that maybe were from where you were from, Rabbi Address, from the camp system, from the youth groups, from Jewish studies programs. The truth is, if you look at North American Jewish life, families are raising Jewish children that are not engaged with those at nearly the rates they used to be.
Correct.
That means we have potential talent that is positively Jewish identified, maybe has a year of birthright, maybe has a year of a positive experience at a Jewish summer camp, but doesn't have much Jewish background, and get to college and they're thinking in their junior year, well, what do I want to do with my life? And before them, they think of, well, maybe I'll go into become a doctor or a lawyer or a social worker or an academic. And it's not that they don't want to be a Jewish communal professional. It's just that it's not really been in their field of view. And so long as we're looking over here for students, but our population has shifted over here, we're going to continue to face a smaller and smaller pipeline. And so one of the things that we're trying to address is how can we get into and in front of current college students who have very positive Jewish identities, have some more limited exposure to Jewish education, and begin to build out programs for high school and college students to get them engaged and get them interested in meaningful careers of service to the Jewish people, to our movement, and to our world, promoting justice and Jewish life throughout their careers.
Are we thinking about expanding our marketing and recruiting campaign, a real aggressive, for want of a better term, public relations, recruiting, multimedia approach to the world, to change the way we recruit? Or is this too off the...
Is it too what?
Is it too off the wall crazy to be that commercial?
It's only off the wall crazy if our goal is to continue following the decline of all indicators in North American Jewry. So if we want to do something about it, it's going to take resources. We have been cutting our support for the resource side of what we do significantly over the last 15 years at HUC in response to declines across the board in multiple places. And yet we continue to do the same level of program. So that means we haven't spent as much in what most people would call overhead, marketing, development, support staff. And our institution is feeling the brunt of it. And I believe we have to significantly expand our marketing effort. I think we need to significantly expand and professionalize our admissions portfolio. That is the way we do admissions.
Right.
There's a professional approach to admissions of graduate and college education that isn't about the tap on the shoulder. You know, what Rabbi Gary Zola, who is such a gift and a treasure for the movement, what he was able to do for 20, 30 years in his position as director of admissions, when you had this rich pipeline, is extraordinary. But now that we are competing for students with law schools, with medical schools, with other careers that they can pursue, we have to get in that game in a much more fulsome way if we want to continue and grow our number of the best and the brightest students that we're attracting to transform the Jewish people, our movement, and the world.
Before we start running out of time, I really have to ask you this because it's in every conversation I have with my friends across
Sure.
the generations, given realities of what's happening, and that is the real significant. You alluded to this at the beginning, the wholesale significant changes that we're seeing in the institutions, the Jewish institutions, specifically in the changes and perhaps merging or declines of denominational structure. That is happening. Where does the college fit into this, in your vision?
Well, yeah, number one, you have to ask why is it happening? And I think it's happening for two reasons. Number one is the obvious resource constraint. As North American Jewish life has declined in terms of Jewish education, engagement, and identity, the knowing, the doing, and the being of Jewish, we have fewer people engaged in it and fewer resources. And so you're looking for ways to leverage and collaborate. I would say the discussion of merger is coming from the outside. As Rabbi Rick Jacobs, the head of the URJ, has said, he's looking for collaborators, he's looking for partners. In that sense, HUC is looking for collaborators and partners too. Being the new guy on the block, I convened all of the seminary CEOs from most of the liberal and progressive seminaries around the world in the last few months. And we now have a working group together. It's not for merger. Nobody's talking about merging. What we're talking
Right.
about is we all have admission needs. We all have marketing needs. We all want to get into before students. We are so different. Let's figure out how we can strengthen each other by working together. So that's number one. But I said there was a second issue, and this to me is much more important and substantive. The second issue is that I think denominations have declined in the United States because, in large part, we don't have clarity of what the denominations stand for anymore. They become denominations rather than ideologies. And so, if I asked, for example, the Reformed Jew in the pew, not the rabbis, not the leaders of our organizations, but the ordinary person that defines themselves as a Reformed Jew, and I said to them, why are you a Reformed Jew? What makes you reform? They're most likely to answer one of two things. Number one, they might talk about audacious hospitality and pluralism and tikkun olam, all of which are very, very important values, but they're practices. And number two, and I'll get back to that in a second, number two, they're just as likely to define themselves by what they're not. Well, I don't keep Shabbat. Well, I don't keep Kashrut. I'm a Reformed Jew because I don't keep all of the days of the holidays. And by defining yourselves either positively or negatively by what you do and don't do, you're failing to actually get to the core of why you are doing or not doing the very things you're choosing to do and not do. And Rabbi Address, I would ask you and your listeners to think about anyone that defines themselves as an Orthodox Jew. And if they were to ask themselves, why am I an Orthodox Jew? They're not going to say it's because I wrap tefillin. They're not going to say because I keep kosher. They're not going to say because I stay away from strangers or whatever the negatives are. They're going to say, oh, some version of, because God gave Torah to Moses at Sinai. All the rest is commentary. And in fact, I would argue that that's about right. What differentiates any of the Orthodox sects, or if you want to call them halachic sects, is the degree to which they take that as a literal piece, and it's defined by a certain definition of interpretation. What then is our core as a religiously progressive institution and movement that meets God gave Torah to Moses at Sinai, Revelation? I think there is a core. It's a little more complicated because it comes from the Enlightenment, and it involves, you can't appeal to that, because from that Wissenschaft framework, from a framework of Jewish history, we have to reject Sinai as literally happening. And when we're left with simply, practices that are very important, but that come out of an Enlightenment ideology and an Enlightenment approach to religion, but without knowing what that Enlightenment approach is, we're left, and I think this is where the denominations are struggling. We don't have a clear idea in the pews of who it is we are and why we are what we are.
Do we have a belief deficit?
We have an authenticity crisis. We have an authenticity crisis because I don't think Reform Jews look at themselves generally and can explain why they are, in fact, authentically Jewish. And in fact, you see this. It's funny that that some of the most significant supporters of Chabad and other of non-religiously progressive movements are religiously progressive Jews who will speak to you about, well, they're the real thing.
Right.
And they have an identity which is denied. And Reform Judaism, religiously progressive Judaism, religiously progressive movements like Reconstructionism, like what I would call liberal forms of conservative that are not halachic, are deeply authentic, but you need to be able to describe it from a framework of enlightenment, of post-enlightenment that emphasizes science and reason, not faith as our way that we know things about the world, that focuses on individual autonomy and authority, not the autonomy and authority of clerics. And number three, that understands our engagement with the particularity of Jewish tradition and practice as a means to universal values of justice, not simply good for their own sake.
Dr. Andrew Rehfeld, thank you very much. The president of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. You've opened up a lot of doors, and I congratulate you on your role here as the president of our college institute. And I wish you nothing but good health and success, but mostly stay healthy, because that'll lead to everything else. Thank you for sharing your ideas and your vision for the College Institute. And if I can help you with anything, you just let me know as fellow Philadelphian. And just thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much. Take care of yourself.
Rabbi Address, it has been a pleasure for me, and I want to thank you for the work that you're doing in really strengthening the Jewish public sphere. The work that you and our alumni are doing is inspiring to me every single day. So thank you so much for your
thank you. Well, HUC is a wonderful place. I mean, it really is, and I'm privileged to continue my teaching there. So thank you. Take care. Shalom, Hatzlacha, and stay healthy. To all of you, again, thank you for listening to this edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. A reminder that you can follow us on our website, jewishsacredaging.com, our Facebook page, Jewish Sacred Aging. And if you wish to make a tax-free donation to help further our work, please go to the website and click on the donate icon. And for suggestions and comments, just email me, rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. These podcasts are recorded at the studios of Lubetkin Global Media in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and we thank our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, thank you for being with us. We look forward to greeting you on our next Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. Todah and Shalom.